be merciful unto us. Give us the shade of your lotus feet. Your fame is spread all over the three worlds. We take shelter at your lotus feet. Srila Prabhupada Ki. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare. Gopi Jana Balava Giri Bharadhare. Gopi Jana Balava Giri Bharadhare. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yamunatiravanachare. Yamunatiravanachare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare. Gopi Jana Balava Giri Bharadhare. Gopi Jana Balava Giri Bharadhare. Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yamunatiravanachare Yamunatiravanachare Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada. Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada. Jai Jai Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jai Jai Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jamshtbad Paramahansa Parivrajacharya Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki ISKCON's founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Ki Shri Giri Govardhan Ki Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Shri Gopanima Mahotsava Ki Sankirtan Yagya Ki Gaur Premanande. All glories to their summer devotees. All glories to their summer devotees. All glories to their assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 3, talks between Lord Shiva and Sati. Text 18. Naitadrishanam Swa Jana Vyapekshaya Grihan Pratiyad Anavastitatmanam Ye Bhyagatan Vakra Diabhichakshate Aropita Brubhir Amarshanakshibhi Naitadrishanam Swajanavyapekshaya Grihan Pratiyad Anavastitatmanam Yebhyagatan Vakrabhi Abhichakshate Aropita Brubhir Amarshanakshibhi Naitadrishanam Swajanavyapekshaya Grihan Pratiyad Anavastitatmanam Yebhyagatan Vakradi Abhichakshate Aropita Brubhir Amarshanakshibhi Naitadrishanam Swajanavyapekshaya Grihan Pratiyad Anavastitatmanam Yebhyagatan Vakradi Abhichakshate Aropita Brubhir Amarshanakshibhi Vyapekshaya Pratiyad Vastitatmanam Yebhyagatan Vakra Vyabhichakshate Aropita Brubhir Amarshanakshibhi Vajanavyapekshaya Pratiyad Anavastitatmanam Yebhyagatan Vakrati Abhichakshate Aropita Brubhir Amarshanakshibhi Naitadrishanam Swajanavyapekshaya Grihan Pratiyad Anavastitatmanam Yebhyagatan Vakrati Abhichakshate Aropita Brubhir Amarshanakshibhi. Ladies, Svabhekshaya Grihan Pratiyad Vastitatmanam and Vichakshate Tab Brubhir Amarshanakshibhi Naitadrishanam Swajanavyapekshaya not to be. Na, not etadrishanam. Like this, swajana, kinsman, vyapekshaya, depending on that, grihan, in the house of, pratiyat, one should go, anavastita, disturbed, atmanam, mind, yea, those, abhyagatan, guests, vakradiya, with a cold reception, abhichakshate, looking at, aropita brubi, with raised eyebrows, amarshana, angry, akshibhi, with the eyes. Translation: one should not go to anyone's house, even on the consideration of his being a relative or a friend, when the man is disturbed in his mind and looks upon the guest with raised eyebrows and angry eyes. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. However low a person may be, he is never unkind to his children, wife, and nearest kin. Even a tiger is kind to its own cubs, for within the animal kingdom, the cubs are treated very nicely. Since Sati was the daughter of Daksha, however cruel and contaminated he might be, naturally it was expected that he would receive her very nicely. But here it is indicated by the word anavastita, that such a person cannot be trusted. Tigers are very kind to their cubs, but it is also known that sometimes they eat them. Malicious persons should not be trusted because they're always unsteady. Thus, Sati was advised not to go to her father's house, because to accept such a father as a relative and to go to his house without being properly invited was not suitable. Naitadrishanam swajanava pekshaya grihan pratiyad anavastatatmanam yebhyagatan vakra diabhichakshate aropyata brubir amarsanakshabi. One should not go to anyone's house, even on the consideration of his being a relative or a friend, when the man is disturbed in his mind and looks upon the guest with raised eyebrows and angry eyes. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presta Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastya Chadeshatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasani Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So Lord Shiva here is trying to help Sati Lord Shiva's very intelligent and in all respects, including social respects, that due to different social environments, social situations, and all the emotions involved under those different circumstances, then people, even people who are close, generally or otherwise, that closeness may be lost, and it may become you could say, like a social disaster, and it can even become very extreme. Srila Prabhupada, in the purport, it's interesting the way he expresses the point here. I mean, it's actually perhaps more profound than one might think. But it's very interesting that Srila Prabhupada begins the purport by saying, however low a person may be, just degraded and horrible, they're never unkind to their children, wife, or nearest kin. And Srila Prabhupada gives the example of a tiger. A tiger is kind to its cubs. And normally the baby animals are looked after very protectively by their parents, particularly the mother, but the parents, you can say the parents. But then, in almost the next sentence, Prabhupada says that sometimes they're not. So it's interesting. However low a person may be, he is never unkind. Never means never. But sometimes it happens. And, one has to consider when Prabhupada, particularly just, within a few seconds of having said one thing, he says something somewhat different. One has to consider what's going on. That, for example, in this case, Srila Prabhupada initially is expressing the norm, the normal situation, the social norm, that normally people, even if they're just like Hiranyakashipu or, proteges of Hiranyakashipu, in many ways following in his footsteps, which is the case nowadays. We have humanity is populated with many little Hiranyakashipus. And so these things happen. Hiranyakashipu, if you read the 7th canto, you see that at certain times, under certain circumstances, he was very nice to Prahlad. He took Prahlad on his lap. And as is a type of Vedic sort of social convention for exchange of affection between parent and child and people who have that type of relationship, took him on his lap, embraced him, and smelt his head. He did not kiss him, sort of slobber on him, or, that sort of thing, which is popular in the Kali Yuga. But he smelt his head. And this is like a cultured type of exchange between a parent or parental type of person and the child. But then Hiranyakashipu asked Prahlad's sitting on his lap and he's holding him, and it seems like just a sort of regular or classic type of father-son exchange. What is the best thing you've learnt at school? And Hiranyakashipu, of course, he has certain hopes or expectations because he knows how Prahlad is being educated. He's being educated for becoming a successful demon, learning things like how to cheat people with a smile on your face so they feel that everything's fine, how to divide and rule, and all these types of things. So he's expecting some answer like that from Prahlad. But Prahlad, when he's asked, what's the best thing you've learned in school? He says, yes, Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam Padasevanam. Yes, like this. Achanam Vandanam Dasyam Sakyam Atma Navedanam. And for Hiranyakashipu, he was not expecting that at all. So what he did, Hiranyakashipu, having sat him on his lap, embraced him, smelt his head, and in a very fatherly, nice way, asked him what's the best thing he's learned. When he heard that, he literally threw him off his lap, just threw him onto the floor. So as Prabhupada says here, malicious persons should not be trusted because they're always unsteady. Yes. Anyway, this is one of the kind of fundamental points here about such people, that normally, as Prabhupada says, even if a person is of low character and low moral standards and all these things, but with their own children, they'll be affectionate. However, when certain circumstances prevail, Shri Radha Radhanath Shri Giri Govardhan Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. So when certain circumstances prevail, then that otherwise or even normally kind, affectionate person will turn around and become an enemy, and even like a monster, like Hiranyakashipu. He was just a monster. He tried to kill his own child. And, he tried to kill his own child, like many parents nowadays. They already kill their own children by abortion. So we read some years ago, the biggest killer of human beings is no longer something like cancer or heart disease or war or whatever these types of things that you might expect. But the biggest killer of human beings is abortion. And what does abortion mean? It means the parents, and in many cases, particularly the mother herself, has decided to murder her completely helpless little baby. And when that happens, then it's just the child obviously can do nothing, cannot resist, cannot really protest or anything. And it's just very unfortunate. It could hardly be more unfortunate. So, therefore, sometimes certain types of people who are normally in that category of close people and affectionate people and like this, under certain circumstances, such people, or at least certain of those types of people, can turn around and become deadly enemies, just deadly enemies, when the material circumstances are in certain ways. Just like, this is an extremely material example, but it's an interesting one. In the presidency of the immediate previous president of America, he was, and maybe he will be again, but anyway, we are not interested in material politics, or we shouldn't be. But he was so sort of aggressive in certain ways and polarizing in many ways, that many marriages ended in divorce, specifically because the husband and the wife, one was on one political side and the other was on his political side, and the relationship became so disturbed that they couldn't continue. Many marriages, normally, you would get that sometimes in politics, but normally they would carry on, their husband and wife, and so they'd carry on. Some differences would be there sometimes, but in this case, it was far more dramatic than it's ever been seen, at least in Western history. And yes, in different situations, people who are otherwise friends and who have been friends, or even not just friends, but very, very dear, like close, intimate family members, they become enemies. They become enemies. And even occasionally they kill each other. So, yes, this is what's happened here, of course, that Daksha, we've read through the story up to this point in great detail, so we all know what's happened. Daksha just, due to pride, means, of course, due to some degradation. This sort of thing does not happen to people who really are of higher character, who are actually self-controlled and have high principles, high standards in very natural ways. Doesn't happen with them. Even, for example, the Kshatriyas, previously in Vedic times, the Kshatriyas who were of very high character, even though they were very powerful military men and women sometimes too. But when they're fighting with some opponent, and somehow maybe the opponent slips and falls down or drops his weapon, something like that, and it's an obvious opportunity to kill your opponent. But traditionally, the Kshatriyas would step back and wait for the opponent to get himself together again. And then they'd continue. And there was one famous one who, those of you from Indian backgrounds, I'm sure you would have heard of Shivaji. Shivaji? 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 No. Yeah, Shivaji. He was one of the great kings who fought the Muslims. Yeah, and you know what happened to him? He fought against the same Muslim leader on a number of occasions in battle. And if I can't remember exactly, if you just Google Shivaji, you'll find the story. It's very interesting. He was of such character. He fought against the Muslim leader on, I think it was maybe 10 or 12 occasions or something, and defeated him and got him to the point where he could just kill him just like that. But he stepped back each time and let him go. But then, the next time, the Muslims somehow defeated him. And you know what he did? He just killed him. So, Shivaji let him go so many times because of Kshatriya standards. It's low class to kill a defenseless person. But, the Muslims, anyway, Hare Krishna, we don't want to get into that too much either. But this other fellow didn't have the same standards. So Daksha, he became attacked by pride. And pride, of course, lust, anger, greed, envy, arrogance, pride. These are the great contaminations of personality, the great diseases of personality, of character. And when someone really develops some or even one or all of these, then their character, they become lesser as persons. And that shows itself in different situations where those low aspects of their characters are stimulated. And then they do things like this. Daksha, his pride got stimulated strongly, and he just didn't have the intelligence and self-control, which is part of intelligence, to withstand it and think, just hang on a minute, let's just take it easy. Even, he could have thought, well, even if Lord Shiva should have stood up and respectfully received me, even if he should have done that, well, it doesn't hurt me if he didn't do it. It doesn't hurt me. I'll tolerate it. He could have thought like that, but he couldn't think like that because pride just overpowered him and just possessed him. And so he went berserk. And we all know the story. And now, and it wasn't just a momentary thing. Lord Shiva, of course, as we read, because he is of much higher character, when all this was going on and he's being just insulted in the most kind of grotesque ways, he didn't say anything. He just quietly left. So, but Daksha now, he's in the same state of mind. He has not had some realization that, oh, I should not have done that, and then tried to make amends. Because sometimes, if you're not so spiritually advanced, sometimes the likelihood or possibility is there that you'll make some offense to someone. It's not, extremely unusual that this even happens amongst those who are trying to be devotees, that someone somehow gets upset and they make some offense, but then they realize and they apologize and like this. But not Daksha. That incident, the initial incident, happened quite some time before what's happening right now. And Sati, in her innocence, and Srila Prabhupada, on at least one occasion that I heard, I witnessed, Srila Prabhupada said, yes, such and such was an innocent person. And normally you think, oh, innocent person, they're nice. And in certain ways they usually are. Innocent person. But then Prabhupada said, yes, innocent, foolish. He's innocent, but actually he also doesn't really understand. So Sati, being sort of like an innocent type of young woman, and Daksha's her father. And surely for many years they were together as father and daughter, and there were many exchanges of affection, and she's remembering all of that. But then there was this huge outburst, but it's sort of become covered over by her feelings that developed for many years due to the association with her father. So her real understanding of what is her father's condition, how I should relate with him, that's all become covered over. Maya Devi it's put in different ways under different circumstances, but one way it's put is that Maya has a covering potency and a throwing potency. Covering, there are different ways of looking at it even, but one way is that the covering potency means that some material situation is there, and particularly some bad material situation is there, but your intelligence has become covered. Your intelligence has become covered. So you don't really see it for what it is, that it's a bad situation. But rather you think, oh, it's okay, because your intelligence is covered. But actually it's bad. And then, if you then, thinking that it's all right, if you then get involved in that situation, it's a bad situation. So then you get thrown. Yeah. Some pain comes your way because it's a bad situation. The covering potency and the throwing potency. So people become covered and they think that just generally that different situations of sense gratification are nice, and therefore I can engage in illicit sex life, it's nice. I can take some intoxication, it feels nice, etc., etc. But then the karma builds up and then they get thrown down in different ways. They can just get thrown into some suffering situation in this lifetime, or in the next lifetime get thrown down into a lower species. So this is the problem here. Sati is innocent. She's sort of, you could say, a sweet young girl who was a favorite of her father. And she's remembering him like that, and she's sort of forgotten, at least to some degree, the seriousness of his offenses against her husband. And indirectly or partially directly against her. So she's feeling, oh, I want to go to my father's house, like that. But actually, Lord Shiva, who is more intelligent, he understands what is going to happen. And so he's not telling her, he's not just saying, you cannot do this. I am not letting you go. You are not going. He's not doing like that. He's advising her that it's best not to go for this reason and that. And here he's saying, because your father has actually sort of transformed through this contact with these lower states of mind. He is transformed from your father in the normal sense of, everything that a father usually is. He has become transformed into your enemy. And he's now your deadly enemy. But she can't see it. Because, well, she herself, in her own ways, as we read a week or whatever ago, she was already kind of materially influenced. She wanted to dress up, dress nicely, with nice jewelry, and, in other words, kind of show off a little bit, you could say. Yeah. So like this, well, the point which Prabhupada draws out at the end of the short purport is that malicious persons should not be trusted because they're always unsteady. So the thing is this, and this is even in a broader sense, it's the same point. It's exactly the same point. But it can be seen in a broader way that people who are under the influence of the material nature, they cannot be trusted because they're in unsteady positions, because the word used here is vyapekshaya, means depending on that. When a person falls under the control of the material nature, they become dependent on the material nature. And whatever way the material nature goes, they go with it because they have no independence from it. They're dependent on it. So, if the material nature switches more into the mode of goodness, then they manifest qualities more of the mode of goodness. But when inevitably the material nature switches into the mode particularly of ignorance, then the person switches into the mode of ignorance, and they cannot really stop themselves. Because vyapekshaya, they're dependent on the material nature. They don't have that independence to be able to step back from it and with intelligence, particularly intelligence in Krishna consciousness, say no, and then actually stand on that decision. There is a motto. There's a motto. It's, a motto. Amongst, it used to be, I don't know if it really still is, there was a whole category of young people in the Western world, particularly America and Europe, who somehow or other, and devotees were behind it. Devotees who had become popular musicians amongst the youth, of taking a stand against intoxication, taking a stand against illicit sex life. If they had relationships with the opposite sex, they would not engage in sex life as such until they became married, and no intoxication at all. And there was Shelter, I don't know if you've heard of them. They were a very popular, extremely heavy rock group, my Lord. And there was another one called 108. And 108, the leader of 108, Vraj Kishore Das, invited me and the late Sridhar Maharaj to one of their concerts in New York. On the evening of Pandavinir Jala Ekadasi, on the day when the New York Rath Yatra had happened. So we went along. They're devotees. And then they started playing. Oh my Lord. It made the Beatles and the Rolling Stones sound like, very pious gentlemen. It was so bizarre, it was amazing. But anyway, we deviate a little. But they had a motto: just say no. Just say no. And some of them had it tattooed on the backs of their hands. Just say no. And they, when people would offer them things, they just show them, just say no. Seriously, I'm not kidding at all. This is completely historically accurate. But, those who were not devotees, but they were just doing it for material reasons, they sort of shifted into the mode of goodness for a while more. After a while, they couldn't maintain those standards, and they started just saying yes. But now they had tattoos on their hands saying, just say no. And they had to get the tattoos removed, which I'm not a tattoo person at all. But I understand is not an easy or pleasant process. But the thing is, and this is the point here, that people who are on the material platform, and therefore, unavoidably, they're contaminated by at least some of the negative qualities to some degree, and in many cases, very deeply contaminated with them. They can't be trusted because they can't be steady, because the modes of material nature are not steady. And when you are simply under the control of the modes of material nature, it is just impossible to be steady in anything. In anything. And particularly nice things. Particularly nice things. So therefore, Lord Shiva knows that this Daksha, he can't be trusted. He's going to do something destructive, and Sati is going to get deeply hurt, and who knows what's going to happen to her. And of course we do know that she gets so hurt by his exactly that treatment, she commits suicide. Yeah. So therefore we have to be very careful, with people who are not devotees, and even it happens sometimes with devotees, their parents become their enemies, actually become their enemies. Yeah. And for example, by legal means, take away their children. Yeah, I mean, there have been a number of cases like that. The devotees were nice devotees, husband and wife. They had a child or some children. The parents were just demons. And by legal means, they somehow or other took away the children. So these things happen when you're dealing with people on the material platform, and particularly people who are really on the material platform. Like you may have heard, there was one devotee lady, Prabhupada disciple, her name was Hladini. Did you hear of her? American. And, she was, I never met her, but we understand she was very sincere, very dedicated, and very kind-hearted. And she was sort of affiliated with Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, so she went to preach in Africa. And she went to preach in Liberia, which is a West African country. And she somehow got access to the top politician, whose name I forget, and she was preaching to him. He was, I think, anti the government and leading an armed revolution against the government. Or else he was the government and defending himself against an armed revolution against himself. But it was one of the two. And she was preaching to him, and he was like, yeah, right, kind of being appreciative to some degree. But then she started preaching to him a bit stronger, and then even stronger, and started telling him he should stop doing whatever it was, something, some violence or something. He should stop it. So what did he do? He and some of his associates arrived, I think, at our ISKCON temple, or at least a place where she and various devotees were staying, and took them, and particularly her, outside and killed her with a machine gun. Yeah. Because you can't trust people who are on the material level. I mean, obviously we have to try and help them, we have to try and preach, but we have to be very careful in the dealings. Even here, people from different political parties have tried to manipulate us to support them. Oh, Krishna. I mean, you can just see it so blatantly, so it's not so difficult to avoid. But yes, so One should not go to anyone's house, even on the consideration of as being a relative or a friend, when the man is disturbed in his mind and looks upon the guest with raised eyebrows and angry eyes. So thus, Sati was advised not to go to her father's house because he was not qualified. He was not really, you could say, on the level of actually being her father any longer. He was more or less her enemy. Hare Krishna. Any comment or question? Yes. Over just Mataji here.
Raj, is innocence inevitably linked with foolishness?
Is innocence
Inevitably linked with foolishness.
inevitably linked with what?
Foolishness.
Purity.
Foolishness.
Foolishness. You know, the acoustics are so bad, but anyway. Pretty much, yeah. Particularly if it's an uneducated innocence. Because innocence means, you know, a childlike, childish sort of condition. Yeah. You put it this way, usually, not necessarily, but oftentimes, innocence is linked with foolishness, a lack of sort of depth of understanding. But not always. Like Srila Prabhupada, many times he displayed what devotees really felt and really appeared to be a type of innocence. But he was so far from being foolish. Yeah, yes. I'm just trying to think of one example, but I can't think of it. Well, yes, I mean, it's sort of, not exactly. But Prabhupada was in Hawaii, and they're driving along, and there are some people in the sea surfing. And Prabhupada said, "Who are they? What are they?" And the devotee, maybe they were walking, but anyway, they were there. Devotee said, "Srila Prabhupada, they're surfers." And Prabhupada said, "What? Sea sufferers?" And the devotee said, no, Srila Prabhupada, they're surfers." And Prabhupada said, "Oh, I see, sea sufferers." So he appeared innocent, like he didn't understand. Oh, sea sufferers? Okay.
Thank you, Raj.
Hare Krishna. That's all. Hogaya.
Maharaj, what happens if you commit an offense and you take all the necessary steps to overcome that offense? Apologize and try to serve the devotee.
Right.
And then you take shelter of the holy name. In the end, you'll take shelter of the holy name. If the person is still not appeased or not satisfied, what happens, or how would you deal with such a situation?
Well, that's a very interesting point. And sometimes it happens because, there are, I would say, two main possibilities or possible reasons why it might happen that they would not be willing to accept. One is that they have their own problem of their own, some enviousness. Yeah, and therefore, even though the other one may have really actually done their best to make up for the offense, in ways which normally would be completely acceptable, but still they're just not, because of lower nature, they're just not capable of accepting. But then also there's the possibility that even though we may have tried, but actually we haven't tried hard enough. That's another possibility. Something like that. But, in Madhurya Kadambini, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that if you've actually tried everything that could be tried, and there's just nothing more that could be done at all existing, then he says, then you should just chant Hare Krishna 24 hours a day.
Oh, it's like that. Thank you, man.
Just 24 hours a day. But, on a more sort of, you might say, pragmatics level, there were cases like that, and Prabhupada advised devotees to just carry on in their Krishna consciousness and try to learn from it. Yeah. Because the thing is, if someone, due to their own enviousness, will not accept, even though, they should accept. It's wrong to not accept the apology and so on. Then they'll get reactions for that. And Krishna understands, so he will excuse if you've actually done everything that could be done. Should never be an excuse, even if the other person is envious and therefore won't accept. That shouldn't be taken as an excuse for doing less than the maximum that could be done.
Okay, thank you, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai.